Did you use face wash this morning? Did you drink a cup of coffee or snack on a piece of fruit? Perhaps you threw on a t-shirt from your favourite fashion brand and popped a chocolate bar in your bag for later. These activities may seem innocuous, but they may be contributing to a dark underworld of human rights abuse all around the world. Because the harsh reality is, a vast number of products and services we buy every day are made by slaves. I'm Justine Nolan, human rights specialist and a professor of law and justice. I've seen firsthand how modern slavery is embedded in consumer supply chains. I also believe we have the tools and the will to root out modern slavery, but doing so is going to mean taking a hard look at how we've got here and talking honestly about what we can really do to make a difference. When we hear the word slavery, most of us imagine the starved and beaten victims of the transatlantic slave trade, toiling in chains or crushed into ships. Over 300 years, that barbaric practice resulted in 12.5 million enslaved people in the Americas. Eventually, outrage at such treatment of our fellow human beings led to bans on owning and trading slaves in the 19th century. And as far as many were concerned, slavery became a thing of the past. Sadly, this is far from the truth. Slavery has not only endured into modern times, it has thrived. Up to 50 million people are enslaved today, some 4 times that of the entire transatlantic slave trade. The difference is that the chains that hold people today are not necessarily physical, but psychological. When we talk about modern slavery, we're referring to a range of coercive practices in which a person is exploited by others for personal or commercial gain and left with no recourse to leave or seek help. Take a man like Suresh. Money is tight at home and desperate to support his young family, he accepts a construction job in another country. The promised wages should be enough to send home and make his family comfortable. But he's told he needs to pay his own travel expenses as well as a recruitment fee. With his eyes on the future money, he accepts the term and moves abroad. But when he gets there, without warning, his employer confiscates his passport and raises the fee Suresh owes. He is now trapped under debt bondage, forced to continue work to pay back what the employer says he owes. He's afraid of what would happen if he tries to flee, and without his passport, there's nowhere he can go. And then there's Maria. As a single mother, she struggles to make ends meet, so jumps at the chance to move to a wealthy developed country on a temporary working visa. The job on a fruit farm seems much like the work she currently does, but with more opportunities and much better wages. And yet, the reality when she arrives couldn't be more different. She's shipped off to a remote farm, forced to work long, back-breaking hours for a pittance and expected to meet unrealistic quotas, or else she won't be paid at all. She then suffers sexual abuse from her employer. Maria doesn't speak the language, know where she is, and has no means of getting away. The chains of modern slavery may not be visible anymore, but they are no less biting than they were 2 centuries ago. Today, as many as 1 in every 150 people work like Suresh and Maria under the yoke of modern slavery, including victims of forced labour, human trafficking and domestic servitude. It's a global problem, affecting men, women, children in every region of the world, in developing countries and developed countries alike. And it's one that we're all complicit in. The underworld of modern slavery may be often hidden from view, but its practices have permeated the supply chains of a vast number of our goods and services. The soap you wash with likely contains palm oil, 85% of which is grown in Malaysia and Indonesia, where producers are meeting growing demands with forced labour. 50% of clothing bought in Australia was made in China, where extensive evidence has revealed forced labour by Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities working in factories and on cotton farms. And then there's the Thai fishing industry, which supplies more seafood to Australia than any other country. An industry built upon captive migrant workers, forced to live in close quarters, isolated on ships. The list goes on, with slavery and human rights abuse lurking in the supply chains of everything from latex gloves to solar panels. In recent years, revelation has followed revelation, and it's become clearer than ever how far modern slavery penetrates our everyday lives. But the question remains as to how to effectively tackle it. Historically, the defence and protection of human rights has fallen to international treaties and national governments, but this high-level oversight is no longer enough to combat the growing problem. It's also the responsibility of the businesses whose success is built on the exploitation of others, however indirectly, to tackle modern slavery. The Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman said in 1970 that the only social responsibility of a business is to use its resources to increase its profits within the rules of the game. But the rules of the game have shifted and now include an expectation that human rights will be respected, and so it falls to businesses to do just that. Incredibly, it was only in 2011 that this principle was written into any kind of formal guidance by the UN. However, saying businesses must respect human rights and put an end to modern slavery is one thing. Actually providing them with a way of doing it and making them do it is another. A few nations, including Australia, have begun to address some of these challenges with laws that require businesses to identify and report on the risks of exploitation, like modern slavery, that exist in their global supply chains. California blazed a trail in 2010 with their Transparency in Supply Chains Act. Then in 2015, the UK passed the Modern Slavery Act, followed by Australia's own Modern Slavery Act just 3 years later. In our version of the Act, Australian businesses are required to disclose annual reports on the risk of modern slavery in their supply chains, as well as the steps they're taking to reduce that risk. But despite thousands of glossy reports having been published since its inception, there's little evidence that the law has made any difference to the lives of people trapped in modern slavery. Because, although it's said that sunlight is the best disinfectant, bringing the rot to light is only the first step in eliminating modern slavery. In contrast, the EU and some countries are championing a stronger approach, taking reporting to another level by requiring businesses to carry out human rights due diligence within their supply chains. Companies will be expected to delve deep into their suppliers' practices and report, and importantly act, on any and all cases of human rights abuse. They're assessing the risks that their company's actions pose to others, rather than just reporting on the risks slavery poses to their own business. Additionally, some countries are establishing accountability mechanisms, which will have the power to investigate individual businesses, impose sanctions for non-compliance, and importantly provide remedies for victims of slavery. These European laws go above and beyond what any other slavery law has done to date. But how effective they are depends on how they're interpreted and implemented by businesses on the ground, and how they are enforced by governments. Still, they represent an important step towards effecting real change at last, moving from policy to practice and going beyond paper promises toward action. In 2023, I travelled to Brazil to investigate the supply chain of French sneaker company Veja, to see what that action might look like in practice. Veja manufactures its shoes in Brazil, which it then sells to over 3,000 retailers in 60 countries, generating around $100 million in revenue every year. But what sets Veja apart is that they've pledged to create a sourcing model which is, quote, in collaboration with nature. They are mainstreaming their environmental and human rights objectives and making financial decisions to support that. They're currently working directly with worker cooperatives, paying 4 to 5 times the average market price for their rubber to ensure that their workers throughout the supply chain are paid fairly and have their rights protected. This is the kind of example that businesses and governments need to follow around the world, throwing away the old business models and reshaping them to protect and preserve the rights of everyone that their enterprise touches. It starts with frank and honest reporting on the part of businesses. Only by normalising and destigmatising disclosure can we hope to encourage others to do the same. Next, governments need effective laws to compel business into taking action, to prevent and respond to cases of modern slavery in their supply chains, and to hold them accountable when things go wrong. Businesses must make commercial choices that preserve human rights standards, opting for goods and services that can be demonstrated to be free of forced labour, and include human rights as a cost of doing business. Governments can lead by example, using the tender process to prioritise companies that are doing it right, while stopping non-compliant businesses from even bidding. They can also ban goods made with forced labour from entering the country. And finally, we as consumers can demand greater transparency and action from companies and use our purchasing power as leverage. Together, we can work to make modern slavery a thing of the past.